Hey friends, happy Wednesday. It's your flower friend Lisa Mason Ziegler, and pretty happy to be coming to you from inside. We're a little nippy here in southeastern Virginia, and today is Wednesday, and that makes it Ask a Flower Farmer. And what Ask a Flower Farmer is all about, if you have never caught us before, is for about 25-30 minutes or so, I take questions that you post in the little bubble with the question mark down below. Anything about growing flowers, cool flowers, seed starting, whatever you got, flower farming business. I will do my best to try and answer them. So just post those questions down in the bubble with the question mark. That way I won't miss your question by having to scroll through everybody's name that has joined us here today. And I have a big reminder for everybody. Tomorrow morning, we're going to be waking up, and it's going to be February, y'all. Do you know what that means to flower farmers? It's like, have you been taking care of business in the month of January? So often I know I was guilty of this. I was so burnt out and tired from the season, and then we roll right into the holiday season, and then I'm like, all right, I'm taking the month of January off, and you just don't do anything, and then you're so behind the eight ball for the rest of the season. You haven't ordered your seeds, you haven't done all the things you're supposed to do. So I'm just here to say, y'all, tomorrow is February 1st, and you better hop to it. And you know what happens as your business develops and grows, you learn so many lessons that nobody could ever have prepared you for. But I have definitely learned just how they say that prevention is like, you know, the whole war. You can fight all the little battles you want, but if you want to win the war, you got to be preventative. And that's the same way is in preparing. And I don't mean excessive planning. I just mean getting your P's in a row. In January, for me, we do specific jobs. A couple of things that are always hot on my topic is I don't get into detailed planning. I do my succession planning, come up with seeds to start, what I'm going to be planting, and some seed numbers, and kind of get that chalked out so that we can actually get busy. And of course, we do major cool flower seed starting, cool season hardy annual seed starting in January. So that's huge, right? That you should be sure you had those seeds last year, right? In the fall when you were doing that. And then another big game changer for me as a very busy commercial flower farmer is I do a lot of freezer filling in the month of January. I have some goals that I set to have a certain number of meals in the freezer for quick pop out and eat during the high harvest season when I am dead tired and just want to have those things. It just makes the whole day better, right? Knowing that you know what you're having for dinner and it's already in there ready and waiting for you. So I'm just saying this is like your 2-minute warning, y'all. It's a little late for the 2-minute warning, right? Tomorrow is February 1st. And for me, I am doing my very early spring planting of cool flowers anywhere from mid-February to March 1st. My Lisianthus are coming a little late this year. They're coming like right at the end of February. Normally we have them come now, and then we harden them off to have them ready to go in mid-February, but I ordered late because things just got away from me, right? And so we're planting from mid-February to the 1st of March, and you know, it's time to get busy doing that. So I see we have questions now. I was gonna talk to you about seeds starting, but I won't do that now. Is there a specific fertilizer that works well for Lisianthus that were started the last week of December? So we pretty much use a general purpose organic liquid fertilizer. It's Neptune's Harvest Seaweed Fish. And that's what we use on all of our transplants. I will use that. We order in plugs for Lisianthus, but I use the same thing on them. And I will tell you, when you buy plugs, those seedlings are definitely used to getting routine, regular feedings. And so I just pick up with my once a week in my watering can with the Neptune seaweed fish. We really love that, and that's what I use for all my transplants once they come off the heat mat throughout their life until they get planted out in the garden. All right, whoops, I already didn't do that right. So glad that Instagram fixed this. Could you explain your process for cool season to warm season bed flipping in Bio 360? Do I pull up and plant in the same hole once the cool flowers stop producing? Do I need to re-amend? That's just really a great question. So I will tell you, as a general statement, we use film for one planting, meaning we made beds in the fall. All my cool flowers, which I posted a reel this morning, that was me in the garden this morning showing my uncovered beds and how things are looking out there. Those beds were covered in film in the fall and were planted. Film still looks great, and it will look great probably until May or June. And those cool flowers are going to be performing during that time. Typically, by the time that crop is done producing, the film is starting to either break down, not so much break down as it gets ripped. People step on it, dogs walk on it. And so we flip the bed by removing the netting, bush hogging, we till, and we remake a bed. And we put film down again. So typically my beds get 2 doses of Bio 360 a year, meaning they get flipped twice. Some get flipped 3 times, but most often when it goes 3 times, that means there's a sunflower planting in that flip, and they don't get any Bio 360. Now, on the other hand, if I had a bed of plantings that are done, and you can, in fact, and this is something that we have done, it's a big part, I think, of regenerative farming and gardening practices, is to cut the plant off like with a pair of loppers or something right at ground level, so you're not disturbing the surface of the soil or the film, and then planting not where that hole was, but maybe on a different planting grid than what you did before, to not, and you can actually put down a couple inches of compost on top of your film. We actually, it's very y'all, it's so, you have to kind of learn the basics of how to take care of beds and then apply it to your application. I was going to say, because we've done this in no-till beds before. So we put down film so we can get some really great weed control. Then with the film is in really great shape, we're saying, all right, we don't want to pull those roots out. We're going to leave those roots of those plants that are done there. We're going to cut the plant off right at ground level. We're going to put 2 inches of compost on top of that film and on top of those little stumps that are at ground level, and then plant. But when you plant, you've got to get those roots of those transplants into good contact with soil. Compost alone will not support them. They dry out really, really quickly. So it really depends on your situation, but as a general rule, we flip completely, amend, add organic fertilizer, and make a new bed and put film on it. But on some occasions, in some instances, you can definitely make a second use, and particularly if you're on a journey of going to no-till, the film just really blocks all the light, so weed seeds aren't sprouting. It kind of extinguishes the surface. So it just depends on what your journey is. All right, let's see. Any cool flowers you feel that need to be up to a bigger block? What's too long in a 3/4 inch block? So that's a really great question. So what she's asking is, do I bump any particular cool flower? And we don't. So really the key, and I mean, I really don't care what method of seed starting you're using. It is never, in my experience, never a good idea for plants to grow longer indoors or in a greenhouse longer than they have to. That is not their mantra. That's not their juice, right? That's not their sauce. And so you want to start them. I tend to start a little bit later than earlier because that allows me, I'd rather have my beds ready and waiting and weather to be right, and me to say, you know what, I think I'm going to sit on those plants for another 5 days, instead of bed's not made or the weather's still too cold and the transplants are getting bigger and bigger. It's all about timing, and I've just learned through the years it's better to start a little later than earlier, so I've never had that need. And honestly, transplants that just kind of grow beyond that, in my experience, we would just trash them and start over again. You're going to have a healthier, happier transplant by adding not much time for us with soil blocking than to actually bump up. That is incredibly labor intensive to do that. If you're growing volume, if you're a small grower or home gardener, go for it. But in our situation, I can't even remember, this was years ago, I thought, oh, I'm just going to bump them up. I mean, it was like, and then I started doing the math. It's like, well, I guess I'd need to make like 1,000 2-inch blocks. Well, that's just not even feasible, right? So you just have to try, and I understand that that's challenging. One of the things that I totally cannot wait for in my new book, the Cut Flower Handbook that's coming, the whole first section about the cut flower concept or the cutting garden concept is helping people to figure out, based on their frost dates and their temperatures, when they plant different groups of flowers, cool season and warm season, because that's the biggest challenge. And I know it did for me. And figuring that out, y'all, you can rule the world then. I mean, literally, when you know when you plant cool flowers and when you plant warm season, and then when you know when to plant it, then you can figure out when to start it at the right time, right? So there you go. Timing is what it's all about. Can Lisianthus take a little shade during the day, or do they need to be in the sunniest spot possible all day? So if you're in the South like we are, I'm in the mid-Atlantic, I'm in Virginia, southeastern Virginia, and we get brutal heat, in the summertime. So, we don't often go over 100, but it happens. And 95 is not unusual, hot and humidity, right? So, and Lisianthus blooms in July and August, typically, for us. So a little afternoon shade would definitely be welcomed by them, and I have grown them in that circumstance. And what I mean by that is they're in full sun until 3 o'clock. 2 to 3 o'clock, they start getting a little bit of shade. They would welcome that, and they do really, really well under those conditions. Do you use a 2-inch block for the Sorrenthy? What a great question that is, because I just moved Sorrenthy back into the grow room. So we did a test in the fall. I had to figure out what time in the fall, I think it was, where I grew them in the Swift Blocker 75, which is like a 9/10 of an inch. That's bigger than the 3/4, and the Mini 27, which is 1.5 inches, and in the Ladbroke 2-inch blocker, just to see how they did. Definitely the 1.5 inch Mini 27 and the 2-inch block were happier. You could just leave them in the block. If you start them in the smaller block, you have no wiggle room. I mean, they are ready to outgrow within just a couple of weeks, and that's just, don't even plan to do that. So yes, I would use the 2-inch blocker for Sorrenthy, and Sorrenthy has become one of my favorite cool flower foliages, even before it has blooms. It lasts really long. It is super branchy, so you get a lot of cuts. Really, really love that. Sorry, y'all. I'm forgetting to hit that X so it doesn't bring up the next question. I started Lizzie the first week of January, still on the first tiny, teeny leaves. Is that normal? It takes 12 to 16 weeks to get a seedling of Lisianthus. The bottom half of that is the soil, and the top half is the transplant growing. For the professionals to get them within 12 to 16 weeks. When I get my Lisianthus, which we'll see if we get to show those here, I'm sure I'll show them on social media. They're tiny, and that's why growers like me, I can start Lisianthus from seed. Germinating, it's not a problem. It's that it grows super slow, and there are so many ways that you can kill your transplants in 12 to 16 weeks. And on top of that, if they survive, if they aren't kept at the correct temperature, that makes those transplants do what's called rosetting. And they look like they're growing and they're beautiful, but they just never produce stems. They never bloom. And that's because they hold a grudge. And temperature issues are that. And so it's like you have to have really controlled situation. And that's why we choose, and most growers learn to choose. It is just so much more cost effective to just order Lisianthus plugs. But to answer your question, and I started them just like you're doing, and I got some, but just not nearly what I had intended to get. They're just really slow. So just be careful and keep them coolish, 70 degrees, not super warm, and don't overwater them, and they need food. All right, let's see what else y'all got here. Do you succession plant Cerinthy? If yes, how many plantings fall in very early spring? So, yes. So I consider fall planting and very early spring planting in itself a succession, right? Because the fall planted stuff is obviously going to start growing earlier and be more ahead of the ones that were just planted not long ago in very early spring. So I do fall plant Cerinthy, and we do or have very early spring planted it. And I don't know that I would go beyond that. It is definitely a cool season lover, I would say. And what happens when you start veering away from the cool flower concept because you've missed the planting time? I know that's not what you're asking me. But when you miss what you think is what the proper planting time in your area is for a specific cool season hardy annual, and people plant really late, the result of that is surely you can try it. But let me tell you why you don't want to try it and waste your time and burn your morale and everything else, is those plants will start from seed most often. You'll plant them and they'll grow some. They'll be short, their stems will not be very abundant, and they are very predisposed because they are not established properly to pests and diseases. So it's like you'll grow them, and it's so funny how we kind of forget, I was supposed to plant those, in mid-February, but it was April when I planted them. You forget that in June where they're just mush, not doing what they're supposed to do. So I do fall in very early spring, but I've never done beyond that. If I lived in New England, I would probably for sure try it another 3 to 4 weeks later. But where I am, we do not do that. But I love that plant. Fall planted Sweet William and it looks rough. Fall planted Sweet William and it looks rough. White leaves, zone 6. Will it recover? Yes. So first off, white leaves classically are just cold damage. And they will get over that. And you're in zone 6. I think Sweet William is technically winter hardy to zone 5. But of course, as I've mentioned from time to time, and I talk about it in the book also, the new book, the Cut Flower Handbook, that while we tend to blame damage and death of cool season hardy annuals wintering over on cold, it is most often from wet feet. And even though that doesn't mean you have puddles of water, that just means that the soil stays really moist because it's not super well drained, which is a really great characteristic you want to look for where you plant your cool flowers. I mean, I would love to make my cool flower beds twice as tall as they are just to get the drainage even better, because nothing dries out because it's hot in the summer. That's what dries it out. In the winter, it's cool. It dries nothing out, and then it snows and rains more often, frequently. For us, it does anyway. And so you just can't count on that. But I think white leaves is cold damage, and they'll be fine. Just leave them alone. Don't be cutting on them. Don't be messing with them. Just leave them be, and they'll start growing. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see what this is. When using soil blocks, what plants do you recommend that you have to use the smallest plug instead? I'm not sure I understand that. When using soil blocks, so the 3/4 inch small blocker The 3/4 inch is the one that makes a cluster of 20. And that's the one that I use most frequently. I mean, up until the Swift blocker, I use that 98% of the time. The Swift blocker has taken some of those seeds just because it makes more. That's the commercial tool of soil blocking. It's a little bit bigger block, but more importantly, it makes 75 in one push. It's just more efficient to actually use. Sorry, y'all, I'm getting all kinds of notifications. So the 3/4, the small block, the only time I don't use the small block is when the seed is too big. When you would even push it into the block, it would bust it open. But we use zinnias, marigolds, cosmos, all of them go in the 3/4 inch block. So we most frequently, I say to people, if you're testing out soil blocking, if you're just getting on board, definitely get the 3/4 inch blocker. That's where everybody should start. That's the most successful, and that is because it's the smallest block of mix of soil. It's easier to keep it evenly moist and warm. We hear the highest praise for the small blocker, and that's where my biggest success was, and it's just super space savvy. So if that's what you're trying to decide which one to get, that's where I would start, and then you work your way up from there. Would you walk us through hardening off cool flowers? Sure. Sorry, y'all. So, first off, cool season hardy annuals, which prefer cool to cold conditions. Cool to cold weather is far less hard on plants than warm weather is to warm season tender annuals. Heat is tragic to new transplants often when they're not hardened off. My general rule is that my plants come out of the grow room when they're 3 to 5 inches tall and get bumped out onto our carport. The carport obviously has a roof over it. We do that because I'm a soil blocker person and we don't want rain to hit the tops of the plants and wash the blocks and make them mush. So they're on a carport that gets wind. It gets morning sun coming in this way. Then when the sun is high, they're protected from that as well as rain. And then in the afternoon, they get another long, hot afternoon blast. So it's a really great place to harden my seedlings off. And they also are exposed to light wind. There is a partial fence around my carport blocking the heaviest wind so that my transplants can really get a foothold. For cool season hardy annuals, I prefer to do that for 5 to 7 days. If you're talking warm season tender annuals, I prefer to do 10 to 14 days. They just need more time to get hardened up. You can also, in some situations, if you're planting in film, which just means black, the biodegradable film with black surface, or if you use black plastic, and you use hoops and lightweight row cover, you can do a lot of that hardening off once they're planted. They're totally protected inside that low tunnel, right? The black film kind of gives the soil a little warming effect. Then you've blocked the wind with the row cover and the hoops. And so you can kind of do that step out in the garden. That's why I have enough hoops, row cover, and weight bags to hoop all of my cool flowers because we can literally, if it works out that way, take them straight from that grow room and put them in the garden, but they're being hardened off in the garden with those steps. And you can find all that over at thegardenersworkshop.com. Long row cover rolls or kits for shorter ones and the hoops and the whole 9 yards. So that's how I harden off cool flowers. All right. What point do you start fertilizing your soil blocks? That's another great question. So it's the same with all seed starting because, I do use occasionally plug trays, particularly when sunflower season starts, which is not long from now, right? Once a week on Mondays in my watering can, I always add the Neptune seaweed fish at the houseplant dosing recommendation that's right on the label. I just put that in my watering can, so when I'm watering on Monday mornings, they're also getting food. And the only trays that don't get that are those that are still on the seedling heat mat or in the germination chamber, because they haven't sprouted yet and they don't require any fertilization at that point. Can you review how to start triloba? I see various methods. So Betsy, I tell you the truth. You should go to, we just do the same thing we do for all the other cool flowers. We surface sow it, firmly seed it, put it in a cool to warm, on a seedling heat mat, on a cookie cooling rack, in about a 65-degree room. In season, oh gosh, Mark, are you on here? Mark, in season, I think it's in season. I see his name so often, Cut Flower. He does an excellent job of germinating triloba in soil blocks. He shows pictures every year. He just gets great germination. He has his little setup just primo for all seeds, but rudbeckias in general. So you could probably get details from him, but that's all that we do, Betsy. But check that out. So Mark Smith, is his name, and it's in season, and he's on Instagram and Facebook. You can find him. He's super helpful. How long into the growing process is rosetting a risk for Lisianthus, even after they're planted outdoors? No, it's during the transplant stage, or do they tend to rosette earlier when they... So the rosetting that I was speaking of with Lisianthus, which is a result or the reaction of the plant to stressful conditions during the transplant growing stage. It happens during the transplant growing stage, and it occurs out in the garden. So it's like the plant that just grows and grows, all this what looks like robust foliage in this big mound, and it just never makes stems. So it is started in the transplant stage, but it doesn't actually happen until they get out in the garden. And after you have spent so long nurturing something, it's just so disappointing. That's why we buy plugs. All right, so this is my last question. I have a appointment right after 1 o'clock. All right, very early spring planting rudbeckia. What varieties do you find last the longest into the hot, humid summer months, or do they all fizzle out around the same time? So that's a really great question too. So last year or the year before, Bobo and I did we're always trying to get those dark colored rudbeckias to bloom later in the summer, right? When you get close to, you want them to bloom in the fall, but they won't necessarily bloom truly in fall because they're day length sensitive. They need long days to bloom. So we pushed the envelope, and I think it was last year that we actually started and planted some rudbeckias out. Like my last frost date's mid-April. We planted them like the 1st of May, right? And they did go on to bloom late summer. They didn't go into fall, but they were doing a pretty good job. So I'm just thinking, they all perform, in my opinion, especially all the ones. The only one that I think of that could be on the short side when you plant them late like that, we get 36-inch Saharas when we fall plant. We have no short stem problems on rudbeckias. Even Maya, I think it's Maya, M-A-Y-A, who is gorgeous, by the way. But I see other people's pictures and she's shorter. I bet planting her later in the season might lead to short. But I would say all those dark ones, Denver Daisy, Sahara, Cherokee Sunset, all of them are super tall for us. And wouldn't you love to have them in late summer bouquets? So I say go for it. All right, one more question, I think. All right. I'll answer this since this is the question of the season, right? How do you plan the layout of your gardens? What goes where? Do you use paper and pencil? Yes. An app? No. So first off, y'all have to know that, I'm severely dyslexic. Dyslexics like hand on paper. And I use spreadsheets. I use all kinds of, apps and things for things. But we use that big calendar to plan our seed starting. Basically, I break all of my garden space into blocks of beds, And I know based on what our business is, whether we're high production, which we are not anymore, or what we're doing, how many beds are in a block. And it's like I break out these blocks, and here's cool flowers in the fall. Here's cool flowers in very early spring. Here is the first summer planting, or when I say summer, I mean the first warm season tender annual. And we typically do anywhere from 2 to 7 summer plantings, depending on the business we're doing. And so I have to have places to put those. But of course, some of these others come available, right? So I find the simplest method, and if you are having trouble with succession planting, most often it's because we're making it way too detailed. I do not go deep. And I will tell you that my new book, the Cut Flower Handbook, it talks about this too. But my book, Vegetables Love Flowers, which is really about a 3-season cutting garden, y'all, has diagrams taking you through the seasons, showing you how to push and pull. When you succession plant and truly practice it, which is what I really talk about in the new book, and pull out crops, breaking into blocks of bed is really, really the secret. So friends, it's 1 o'clock. I have to go. And remember to meet me on the show this Friday. I'm live inside my app. I'll be streaming at 12 noon. It's all about Valentine's this week. We'll have some great gift ideas, and we'll just have a whole lot of fun. And friends, I hope to see you in there. If you don't have my phone app, just go to your phone's app store and Google, go to your phone app store and search Gardener's Workshop. Download our app. It just gives you a lot more features. You can watch replays. But meet me at 12 noon. I always give away something free during the show to one live viewer that signs up. And I hope to see you there, friends, because we are ready to get the pedal to the metal around here. And I also have to say, look at this, y'all. My friend, Jennifer, follower, always sends me a delightful package at Christmas. And these sunflower glasses, y'all are going to be seeing these this year. This was in her package that she sent me. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I love them. And all right, friends, until we meet again, ciao.